Hi, my name is Tokyo, or Yuki, whatever you want to call me. This is the first time you actually hear my voice outside of a discussion or debate. I just want to make it very clear that I might be trying to start actual scripted content in the future, so if you're interested in that, go ahead and sub, I guess. I don't fucking know. Enjoy the debate, nigga.
Was I ever afraid of the dark? Not that I can recall.
The Sigma. Anyways, so I'll send the scan. Alright, I sent it in, what's the word for it? Side chat. Damn, there's some baddies doing this.
Hyper modifiers for chronology and causality to work pretty much how I want. Yeah, what's the context of this scan?
The context kind of in it. All she's doing is saying that she made, I guess, putting it in variables, she made an ability X to beat these two chapters. And I have other scans to back up this. I'll give the two other scans for the context. It's really just saying she's going to beat two characters because pretty sure they have beef between the anime and the, I guess, series in general.
When I say, like, what's the context of that, I'm sure she's using it against an obstacle, but when I say, what's the context of this, I'm like, because obviously you're just showing me this statement. I don't know what she means when she says, I even modified causality to work in the way I want it to. That can mean, like, multiple different things, not that she necessarily manipulates it at will. So I'm like, that's why I asked, what's the context of this statement? But if you have, like, other scans, that'll be cool, too. You could, like, just send that.
It seems like when she says modified, she's using the normative definition, in which is to manipulate or change something to work in such way that, assumingly, that aligns with her will. So modified it in a which allows it to align with her will. That's the normative definition, and I don't see why they'd use some sort of unnormative definition when the context fits perfectly. When the context in itself is her, we would say that she's trying to change causality, so she could beat these two characters in a fight. So it just seems like the most explanatory thing to posit would be modified is used as the normative context or the normative definition, which I can give.
Sure, but what would be the degree that this ability could apply for? Like, what's the the highest application of this ability?
Modify. Oh, my bad. Modified is just past tense of modify, but oh my gosh, do you ever get that glitch on your phone where it doesn't bring up your keyboard?
Yeah, sometimes.
When that happens, give me a second. Holy fudge. My bad, I got kicked out of BC, but here's the Merriam-Webster and Cambridge Dictionary. Modified, undefined. Okay, I don't know, it doesn't give the definition, but I know Cambridge does. If you click on it, all it means is to have been changed slightly, used to improve or make something. The question you asked, what is the extent of the ability?
Yeah, I see what's the extent of the ability.
I'd say it's anything to which, as it says in the scan, it just says to work on what she wants. So the extent would be dependent upon her will or how she wants it to be. I would say that the reason why it says pretty much is because it's not, she wouldn't be able to change causality fundamentally. She would be able to change causality in significant ways in which allow her to win. So I would say.
So if I say I can eat as much burgers as I want, does that mean I can do that?
You said what?
If I say I can eat as much burgers as I want, does that mean I can eat as much as I want? Like, let's say, for example, let's say I want to eat 100 burgers, right? Do you think that's possible? Without, like, me getting any sickness or anything?
It's possible.
But do you think
What
that
when you say possible, what is the framework of possible? Like, what model scope are you referring to?
what modal scope am I referring to? I mean, I would say probably nomological possibility, right? I don't think
I mean,
that it's really.
nomonologically, you can eat 1,000 burgers and not get sick.
I don't think that's true. I'm seeing people eat less and they get sick. But right, but let's just say, let's just say even
You're in reference to biological possibility. Nomological impossibility deals with laws of physics, not laws of biology.
all right, well, I'm mistaken then. That's my bad on my part. Well, either way, right? Let's just say even let's say like uncountable, maybe say 2,000, 3,000, however much, right? If I say I want to eat this much burgers or have this much, does that mean I can now do it just because I said so? Or is it according to my will that I would want to perform this said event or said action that I can now be able to do it to any degree that my desire is because I said so?
No, and if you're trying to apply this to the scan, the reason why that wouldn't work in the first place is because it's in the scan. She makes it so causality works in such a way that if I want to go, if I want to run at the speed of light, that doesn't mean I can because I'm not manipulating anything to allow me to do such. She modified it in which causality would align with her will or how she chooses to use causality. It's the difference.
Okay.
One's based off of causality being indexed to our will, and one's based off of reality not being based off your will. So even if you wanted to eat 1,000 burgers, because your biology isn't indexed to what you want, it wouldn't matter.
Yeah, but here's the problem, right? That argument isn't coherent. Not only does it presupposes that even that like how do I explain it? That she can kind of do it to any degree that she wants to. You're saying that she can do it to any degree that she wants to because she has already demonstrated some level of control,
Not
right?
any degree,
Just because,
but not any degree.
or to like a, I'm assuming to like a high level degree, right? That
Yes,
she can be able to
any degree
perform
in
this.
which allows her to win. Yeah, because that aligns
Yeah,
with her
but
will.
if like a character has shown maybe have fire manipulation, that doesn't mean he can manipulate fire to the highest degree. Maybe manipulate fire from the sun or fire from volcanoes or so on. Doesn't mean he can be able to do that just because she's shown some level of degree. You're just making a huge jump in logic that because she has shown some level of manipulation, I mean she can do it. She can fulfill her will to other levels of degrees, right? Like right
But the
now, let's assume
problem is,
like here. Hold on.
the
Let's
problem,
assume the character's like 3 dimensional. That doesn't mean she can now manipulate causality on a 4D framework.
the problem is, give me a second. The problem is you're leaving for your analogy. It doesn't work because you're leaving out the context. The fact that the ability in itself that I'm in reference to is the descriptor of it is that it's based off of her will or it's indexed to what she wants. So even in those scenarios, yeah, maybe if I have some fire level manipulation, we can't just make the we don't gap the bridge on which extent. You might say it's low level if we have no observed data. It would be any higher, but the thing is, the ability in itself is described to be based off of what she wants. So we would say as long as causality stays fundamentally the same and she's not able to change the fundamentals of causality, then there would be no problem with saying that she's able to do other things such as changing causality in the sense that if she punches a wall, instead of the wall getting broke, the wall actually expands to 3,000 puppies. Because that doesn't change any fundamentals of it and it perfectly corresponds with the predicates given to the ability, I don't see why this would be problematic. It just seems like you're leaving out the context to it seems like you're leaving out the context of the ability, that being that it stated that she modified it or changed it in such a way that it would be indexed to her will. And then it's also consistent within the narrative that she has fate manipulation or manipulation based off causality.
Okay, correct me if I'm wrong. Is your argument not that, or your refutation that you just gave right now, not that because it's according to her will that she would want to be able to manipulate causality, that she can be able to use it to a degree with necessarily not without a degree without limit, or is that not
Would you
what you're saying? Are you saying that she can manipulate causality to because if her will is to be able to manipulate causality, that she can be able to perform, be able to do this, and she can be able to do it to like a high degree?
My bad. Repeat that one more time. I was messaging someone.
I'm asking, is your response that you just gave right now? Because I missed some parts, right? Is it, or you can just restate it. That is it not that you're saying that because her will is that she will want to change causality or manipulate causality? Is it not that because of her will is a predication that she can be able to perform this action to much higher degrees, and it's all predicated off her will or her motives.
That's semi my response. My response is mainly just saying because the ability is described as her the causality manipulation being indexed to what she wants or how she wants it to work, we can just come to the conclusion without jumping a big gap in logic. We can just come to the conclusion that she's able to manipulate causality as long as it doesn't fundamentally change causality. What's it
What
called?
do you mean
Because
fundamentally? What do you mean fundamentally change causality?
yeah, one of the principles of causality, under specifically an Aristotelian form, we would say that any cause and effect must have some degree of correlation. This correlation could be the correlation in between which causes it, where a cause has the same um, predicate, or no, my bad, the cause has the same variable in which the effect also has. Like, for example, if I punch the wall and the wall breaks, both the effect, that being the wall breaking, and the cause, that being me punching the wall, share the same aspect in the sense that I'm involved in it, or I'm the reason why the cause exists, and I'm also the reason why the effect exists. Um, she can't change things like that, but I would say she can change things such as like what an effect is going to be. Like if she wants to causally manipulate, she wants to make the effect of her eating 10 burgers, uh, she can make the effect of that. People don't die from world hunger anymore.
Okay, I see what you're saying, but based on how I'm interpreting this, right, I'm putting her will or what she would want to do into question, and your response to that is that because she's already demonstrated a level of control, that would then justify her will.
What are you putting into question of her will?
I'm putting into question that because of her will, wanting her to be able to, she wants, or her motives is to be able to do this, what demonstrates that she can actually be able to use her ability to such a higher degree. And when I say higher degree, I mean like at a level beyond like a 3D scope is what I mean when I say
Okay.
higher degrees.
Causality doesn't work based off of spatial dimensionality.
So you don't think that if there's like higher dimensional planes, that there isn't a higher level of causality, or causality doesn't operate at a higher level?
No, causality stays the same mathematically speaking. So causality is just another way, or is I guess 50% of time, like time fundamentally uses causality. So we could have a fifth dimensional character, but they will always have the same dimension of time as a third dimensional character because time doesn't fundamentally change. Maybe time is perceived a bit differently, but fundamentally it stays as a progression of physical events. And since time doesn't change, and it really can't change any definition, you can't describe it as time, space, or higher dimensions, then we would just say that it's a constant dimension, or if you want to call it a dimension, it's a constant value that's spanned within all dimensionality. So even if she's 3D, your character's infinite 3D, or infinite D times 100 to the power of 10, she can still manipulate a causality in which significantly affects your character because your character still has the same time that she goes under.
And I don't. When we say that a dimension has like temporality, operating at a different level, we're not necessarily disagreeing with like necessarily the ontology, right? Like time and space is basically going to be defined the same ways that the rate that it operates is going to be different. When we're talking about like another dimension, it's going to be transcendent above the third dimension. So it was like, how do I explain this? Yeah, you know, like how mountains, like the rocks at the bottom can be stronger than the rocks at the top, but then either way, they are still both rocks and they both have the same definition. They are both the same thing, but then you can still be able to, you can have more time destroying the lesser or newer rocks, and then compared to the old rocks, you'll be able to struggle trying to destroy those, right? So it's like these things can be defined the same way, but operate on a different level. So when I'm talking about like fourth dimensional time, fifth dimensional time, or like level reality where these things both exist, they're gonna be defined the same way, but it'll just operate at a higher level. So just because she can manipulate time or manipulate causality itself doesn't mean she can use that a level beyond her scope of reality. Because when we're talking about other dimensions, they're above or transcendent above her scope of reality. So what would necessarily justify that she can use her ability above her scope of reality? Just because they're defined the same way doesn't mean she can just manipulate it. That doesn't make sense to me.
because causality is indexed and only really indexed to physical progression. Nothing about causality can change significantly to where like your rock example comes into play. Like I can't say like the reason why space can change in the sense that based off higher dimensions, in the sense that we might have a third axis, a fourth axis, or a fifth axis. That's because how space works. Space is just a direction, or space just deals with directions, or I guess physical events with involving directions. Or I forgot the specific definition, but space really only deals with directions and stuff like that. What is physically observable given matter. I guess you could argue that certain things don't have matter, but clear definition. Either way, given an Euclidean board, how we determine dimensionality, we determine it based off of how many axes there are on the said Euclidean board. So let's say the one you're probably familiar with is the 2D one, where we have an up and up, down, and left, right, or forward and backwards. That's how we determine dimensionality based off of which directions the line go. The thing is, time isn't indexed to certain attributes. It's not indexed to how it changes. It's indexed to something else. Henceforth, it cannot change significantly to where it becomes a non-constant within when we deal with dimensionality. Well, space is self-referential in the sense that it changes in itself. Time doesn't change in itself. Time changes indexed to spatial events. Henceforth, or time would change indexed to spatial events.
When we're talking about like spatial dimensions, let's say there's a fourth dimension that exists, right? And we can't necessarily conceive of this dimension, or we can't necessarily perceive of this dimension, but it's just transcendent above the dimension that we live in with ourselves. Why do you think this is the case? That a
You said what?
dimension. I asked you. I said, why would it? If there's a spatial dimension, like the fourth dimension, that's transcended above the third dimension. Why do you think it's transcendent, or what do you think the properties of transcendence looks like? Right? Because for me, when we're saying that a dimension is transcendent above the other, I'm not necessarily saying that space and time is going to be like how you were saying, it's going to just have some new or huge distinct properties. But I'm just saying that they're going to be operating at a different level, right? So even like even when we look at like 4D and math, I'm sure they still grant the same things, but they claim it operates at a different level. The fourth dimension is greater than the third one. The fifth dimension is greater than a fourth one. When we're talking about spatial dimensions, these things are going to still have the same properties, but they just operate at a different level. Because it doesn't really make that much sense to me that you can think that a character will be able to operate and control something beyond her dimension, and then because they basically are the same thing.
To answer your question on what does it mean for me to transcend a dimension, I would just say specifically it's just spatial, or having more spatial coordinates or directions than lower dimensions. So like 4D might have up, down, left, right. What's the other one? Forward, backwards. Um, and then it might have an additional direction, in which is like, I don't know, I can't even describe an additional direction because it's above our comprehension, but we would say it just has an additional direction. The reason, and then again, the reason why time can't change in the sense that it operates on a different level is because all time is indexed to is physical events progressing. So even if these physical events change significantly, the fact that there are physical events, once go, it means that time scale is still going to work. It's not indexed to, like, for example, for space, the reason why we can have different operations of dimensionality is because it's indexed to the spatial coordinates or the axes in which currently exist. Time doesn't work like that because time is indexed to something else. It's not
Okay,
based off of
let me ask you a
it.
question. When you say that space has different directions, like in different dimensions, do you think like these are going to be different directions that we can be able to perceive on, like, when we are three-dimensional beings, that we'll be able to perceive like the 4D dimensions or 4D coordinates? Do you think these are going to be things we can perceive? And if not, right, then time itself is just a progression of events within that said dimension. Which would mean if these things are unperceivable, that means that within itself would just say that time itself is going to be operating at a level that's unperceivable to somebody who operates on the 3D level. If
When we
that makes
speak
any
of
sense.
when we speak of higher dimensionality, we technically can perceive higher dimensions in this, or a higher dimensional being, in the sense that every higher dimensional being, let's say 5D for example, a 5-dimensional being can be perceived by a 4-dimensional being to an extent. They can be perceived in the shared axes. Every 5-dimensional being is going to share axes with every lower dimension. And also, I would say, no, we can't perceive the 5th dimension, but we can perceive time because time itself isn't involved in axes. Again, time itself isn't significantly changing because all time is based off of physical progression. So even if the physical or the way something physically progresses changes, that doesn't, because the definition is so exhaustive, it wouldn't significantly change the properties of time. This is why you can have speed at higher dimensions, or this is why you can say a 5D character is uh, FTL plus or MFTL plus because he's using the same speed formula in which is just distance over time. So if that was the case that it changed significantly, then we couldn't use, or it changed in a different operation, then we couldn't use the speed formula because the speed formula is based off of time as we know it.
Okay. What's your definition of time? Or
What's
how
my
do you define? Yeah.
physical progression of events?
Okay. And when you say physical progression of events, you mean like end and beginning of events?
Or I guess spatial progression, but either way, so
I said, like, what do you like? Would you think like spatial progression would just be like the end or beginning of events, uh, just the end or beginning of events, just events forever? I mean, not necessarily forever going, but just beginning and end of events is gonna be what you define the physical or spatial progression of events to be. Just the beginning and end of events.
it can be that, yeah, but it could also be the middle. It's in the middle of going from point A to point B. It could also be the end, or going from near the end to the end. All it's referring to is the state of affairs shifting. The state of affairs that shifts is time. Is involved in
Because
time or indexes time.
okay, so like I don't know how to explain this. When we're talking about dimension, like when we're, like how do I because I don't really see, I'm not really understanding your point because no, I understand your point completely, but I just don't see how. Because when we're talking about time, like you said, right, it's a progression of events, and you agree that space is going to change in that on different dimensions. Like there may be different coordinates or so on that are going to be a part of the dimensions. And you said that you believe we can perceive higher dimensions to a certain extent. And let me ask a question for clarity. Do you think that the parts that we can perceive or understand to some extent is in reference to the dimensions that we already know of, and not anything extra that comes upon, like higher dimensions?
Well, I wasn't really listening, but do you want me to just like simplify why I'm saying time doesn't change the operation that it levels at, or the level that it operates at?
Well, based on what I heard, you said is because it's the index, right? You said it doesn't
You want me,
necessarily change, and you believe that time is. You said what?
you want me to simplify that?
Yeah, sure.
All right, so when we speak of spatial dimensions and how they can operate at different levels, this is because what they're in reference to or what they are based on. They are based off of something internal to space, that being axes. When we speak of time, let's say we suppose that time supposedly has the ability to operate on different levels. The reason why this wouldn't work is because time doesn't operate on something that it itself has. In order for it to operate differently, it would have to have some sort of properties in itself that changes, the same way that space does, where the given higher dimensions, the axes change. Time, though, because it's index or it refers to physical progression, meaning something involved in space, it even if those spatial events change, time stays the same because it's not defined by the level of operation. Rather, it's just defined by the existence of this set thing. So if we can existentially quantify any physical event, well, then we have time. But if we can't, we can't do the same where if we can quantify any level of operation of time that's higher, then we have time because that's not how time works. Time is necessitated based off something else's existence, while higher dimensions is based off its own or space's existence, meaning it's indexed to itself, while time is indexed to something other. than itself. The same way a tree can like grow taller, but the leaves don't, because the leaves are indexed to the tree and refer to the tree for growth, while the tree only is referring to itself for growth.
Okay, but can we agree that, like, say, for example, character X has the ability to matter manipulate or change matter, right? We can agree that the universe itself is like made out of matter, or planets are made out of matter, but this character can only be able to matter manipulate rocks, mountains, and so on, and can struggle manipulating or matter manipulating a planet or using it to a degree to manipulate or change the properties of the planet, right? So,
Yeah,
for example, here,
yeah.
even if we want to just grant that time itself doesn't necessarily change, it's just that space itself changes, and that time itself basically just stays the same, no matter on what dimensional plane, right? But how do I explain this? How do we know that she can use it to like to such extent that, like, even if how do I explain this? Like you said earlier, that we won't be able to necessarily like, correct me if I'm wrong, we won't be able to perceive the extra properties of space on higher dimensions. If a character was to have higher properties, how do we know that, whatchamacallit, she can be able to use it to such a degree to still affect this character, right? Because, like, we can agree that people, like, yeah, and then we can agree that if you're a three-dimensional person, you'll have the same properties as the three-dimensional space, obviously. So how do we know that she can be able to use it to an extent to affect somebody at like a higher level? Even if we say that time is the same, right? That doesn't necessarily mean she can just be able to manipulate necessarily higher realities, even if she can manipulate some level of reality as she's demonstrated in her verse. How do we know she can manipulate something as like a whole dimension within itself, or use it to an extent that goes far beyond like her universe or her dimension?
Yeah, so first of all, to address your analogy, the thing about matter manipulation, I might only be able to manipulate matter in terms of rocks or mountains. That's because I'm the amount that would be in reference to quantity manipulation. I can only manipulate a certain amount of quantity of this thing. The difference is time and space don't work on quantity in the sense that I'm referring to, or the sense what we have to refer to when we speak of whether they can operate on different levels. That's because they refer to qualitative changes. The thing to explain that, because when we speak of higher dimensions, we speak of a qualitative change in the sense that we have non-numerical value, that being, or non-numerical properties that change, that being axes or directions. Obviously, they can involve numerical values, but they aren't themselves something numerical. We'd say that would be qualitative. And the reason why she would be able to manipulate a high dimension, even though she can't quantitative or what's it called, qualitatively understand spatial axes, is because the qualities of time stay the same. Henceforth, it doesn't it doesn't change at all based off of higher dimensions. Rather, it's the higher dimensions that change themselves. Again, same way that a tree grows. It's not a funny joke. A tree, when it grows, the leaves aren't necessarily going to grow like the tree does, or it's not going to the leaves aren't going to operate on a different level because the trees are don't qualitatively change, but the leaves don't qualitatively change while the tree does. So the answer is just that because there's no qualitative difference for time, if you operate under time, you are affected by every quality that time has. Henceforth, even if your spatial coordinates or your dimensionality is different, because you operate under time and you operate under these said qualitative properties that she's able to manipulate, you would be manipulated by those qualitative properties. Because you can't apply an arbitrary standard just because they are higher dimensional in something else, even though they don't work under these said properties.
Okay, in the analogy, when it came to matter manipulation, sure, you can say it's level of quantity, but it's also mostly just a level of like how things can can be like greater than the other. So it's like, yes, I guess sure that can be necessarily quantity, but what was the context of when she was using abilities, right? You said she was fighting somebody. But how exactly did she use? How exactly did she manipulate? How exactly did she manipulate causality in that moment to use it? To use at her advantage, right?
I mean, I don't know. think they ever fight, to my knowledge. I think she's just using it because she wants to fight them. Like, they're not enemies, to my knowledge. Like, they're chill with each other, but they have beef. So I don't know if she uses it, but either way, I could just make up like a way she uses it. Maybe like if she's saying it's based off of how she wants to, like she says, pretty much how I want, I could just say that. Well, if she desires something and she actively participates in her will, having to I guess if she actively participates in wanting this thing, in the sense that she thinks about it and then she by virtue of her thinking about wanting to do this, it happens, like it's an activation cue. That could be the case, but it could also be passive in the sense that if she passively thinks she wants to causality manipulate someone, it works.
I was in
But like
reference to the context of the panel, like when she used the ability, not in terms of the hypothetical versus battle. I was in reference to when she used it.
she didn't use it.
You said what?
She didn't. The scan doesn't say she used it. It's saying that she's going to use it.
And do you have the panel of her using it?
No. I got banned from the server for arguing with this this like 24-year-old man e-girl.
Okay. Oh, anyways.
Actually, I don't have the
Well,
context.
we know she can manipulate. You said what?
I can look for it, but I don't think I have the scan because I don't have the scans of her fighting.
That
It's
was
just
not necessary information, by the way.
I'll put
Well,
it in.
you can make a solid argument for being necessary, but I'm not gonna give him a burden, right? But let's say right, that she can manipulate causality. Like, for example, you can manipulate causality in a sense that you can just stop time totally, or you can manipulate it in the sense to where you just slow down time, or you can manipulate it in a sense to where you can reverse time and so on. And but there can obviously, but then some characters can distort time to where things can slow down, but not necessarily make it to a stop, right? So, like in this context here, when she says manipulating causality, what what way does she mean? Because with the way that you're referencing her manipulating causality seems as if she can do, like you said, whatever she wants, but like her will or her motives, what would necessarily justify her motives to being something true or something that would actually apply to reality? Then what would be the argument or response to that? If we were to just grant the
You're
whole
just
time
asking.
thing.
You're just asking why her willing it to be the case makes it become the case.
I'm asking that. Yeah, I'm asking why would that make it be the case when we know that there could be different applications of manipulating causality, and that
Oh
there
yes.
can
So
be a possible limit.
the reason why I think we are motivated in saying that it's in reference to any extent that's not fundamental, I would say, well, because what the fuck? Um, give me a second. Let me go back to this game. All right, I would say because the statement in itself is so exhaustive, we have no reason to say that it's in reference to some set framework within causality. Because all it's saying is she modified causality. So she says she's modified causality because there's no specifics. Like she's literally just saying she modified causality. We would have to assume that it's in reference to the entire of causality, as long as it's not anything fundamental and which changes what causality is. That's why I believe that it would be an exhaustive form of causality because it's not specified and there's no implication of it being specified. And also the fact that she's modifying something, modified usually implies that you're modifying this exhaustive extent of something rather than a small part of it. Because in order to modify something, you have to make changes to the whole thing for it to function under one specific modification. Like even if say I modify a car, say I modify the engine. Well, this engine, let's say it went from a V6 to a V12. Well, because it had some sort of modification in which allows it to work differently, I would have to modify every other or the majority of the other parts of the car for it to function properly, or it's just gonna break. And then also the reason again why it works to her will, and that if she wills something, is because the ability is into her will, so it's based off what she wants. If she doesn't want X to happen, then it's not going to happen. It's the same way that Luffy having subjective reality manipulation, where whatever he wills becomes true because it's indexed to his will. It's an ability based off his will, and any ability based off the will is inherently going to follow the will. So it can't like go on some arbitrary limits that are external to the will unless these limits are in reference to some fundamental thing or are specified.
Okay, so when it came to the whole like the context of the statement, right? Like, for example, if I've never been able to modify time or have any effect towards it, but then let's say in some encounter I do manage to change time, either it's just me causing small distortions within causality. If I wasn't able to do this prior, I'm going to over exaggerate or say this or say that about what I've done or accomplished. If I've never performed this feat before, doesn't necessarily mean that it's now can be able to be applied to such a huge extent because of the way she said the statement or the way she's talking about it. Doesn't necessarily mean that she can use it to such a great extent. And even when it comes to the whole thing about her will, right? When it comes to the, her powers are predicated on her will. We know that even in fiction, that people can still have powers be predicated on their will or want this to happen, and it's just not necessarily work like that, or it doesn't necessarily apply to every level. And some people's abilities can work that where they can kind of just do whatever, but it's kind of just limited to what they can imagine or what they can perceive, and that's something that I don't think is necessarily contradictory, right? So I don't think that if she doesn't know how to distort time to such a greater extent, then I want to necessarily say she could. And I'm not necessarily saying that this is the case. I'm saying that that's something possible. The scan that you saying yourself is kind of doesn't really give clarity to the way she can use her abilities. We just know she can modify time. But you gave an example saying that modification is going to be in reference to you're going to need to change a huge significant part of it in order for the whole thing to change. But let's say, for example, one leg of my bed is broken, and then I modify and change a part, like replacing the leg. My bed can be able to stand, but all I needed to do was fix one part, not necessarily needing to change the whole bed in order to fix it. Or another example, like what's it called? That was a good example. Like maybe a part of it.
Modifying doesn't entail fixing. I would say there's a distinction between fixing and modifying something. Modifying would say that something's not necessarily broken, but you change it to function a bit differently. The thing about fixing is, in fixing why something is damaged in which it doesn't function to its proper standard. So you have to fix it for it to function properly. And then, can you summarize your two questions that you're asking?
I was saying my fault. I was saying that when it came to the statement relating to her will, that I'm saying that because even if she wants to will that to something, it's very possible that she may, it may be according to her will that she may want something to happen, but not necessarily know how to do it or not necessarily understand or fathom a certain concept. Just because according to her will doesn't mean she can just be able to do anything. I could say it's according to my will. Let's say I did have a power to be able to grant whatever I want. I could say, oh, it's according to my will, I want to be able to perceive God. But if God is like some spatial atemporal being, that may not necessarily be logically possible, right? According to maybe my own sense. I'm not that, even though this example may be different because obviously this person may be aspatial atemporal. It's kind of idea that something can be complex and that and just because it's according to your will doesn't mean that it can necessarily apply or operate at that level. And when I was talking about the modification, the way she kind of exaggerates the statement or the way the statement's focused on can be in reference to how she's never done this before and now she does it. Because if I've never been able to modify time and then I've done it even to such an extent to where I just distort time or cause some type of slow in time, I would say this or say that about the statement. And especially with the context that you gave, we don't really have much to go off. But she says modified time, even if we're just still man a point that modification is just going to be in reference to something huge or something very significant. She can obviously just be over exaggerating, especially if we don't know if she's used this ability before. And also yeah, and even if we talk about modification, even if she just uses the word modification, if you've never manipulate time before, using the word modification would make sense. Even if you're just using it to such an extent to slow down time, it would make sense because time is no longer operating the same way that it was. So you made a huge change, even if it's not to a huge change to the extent to how you can control time. How you can control time to a way higher extent, but you can still it'll be like a huge extent compared to just time operating at its normal level. If you were to create some type of distortion to it, if that makes sense.
Right. So, all right. I'll respond to that point, and I kind of forgot the initial point, the first question you gave. So I'll just ask you to repeat that after. So the reason why I don't think it would be that it would only be in reference to some small level of modification is because not only has she used time before, I'm pretty sure, and then also I would say, well, in order to make that claim or to give motive to that claim, we would have to say, okay, well, it's the case that it's specified. But as I said before, because she's saying causality so exhaustively, for us to say if this statement was in reference to only a small part of causality rather than the whole exhaustive thing, to be so ambiguous, there would really be no motivation to believe that. Through the fact that not only have we seen multiple times where she's able to manipulate things such as victory or fate or things that are involved with causality, we just have more credence to in the belief of saying that it's not actually in reference to some small part, rather it's in reference to a whole entire part, or I guess it's very exhaustive, and I might say this because any quantification over what she's modifying, and usually when we speak of modifying a specific type, that would require some sort of quantifier or quantification over that specific type. If this isn't specified, we have no reason to believe this. And if you were to believe that's a thing external to the statement, that would require other proof, which I don't think you have any proof that she only modified it to an extent. And I could say, well, if it's even modified chronology and causality, there's no implication that it's only in reference to some part of it, because all she's saying is causality and chronology, meaning she's looking at, she's using it, what's the word for it? Give me a second. She's using causality and chronology in its simpliciter rather than having extra propositional value to it, in which might entail the extent. So, I mean, logically, we could deduce it's not in reference to anything else because she's only using it in its simpliciter rather than adding additional values that we could determine whether it's in reference to some extent or not. And then, what was the first part?
It was in reference to her will and how even if you may have a willpower for something, if something may be more complex,
Yeah.
that you may not, that the power may not
All right.
operate on such level.
I grant this in some extent. I would say if she tries to do something illogical, then obviously she won't. That won't work. That won't do anything. What's it called? This is so it won't allow her to do such thing. But I would say anything to her extent of her knowledge works. Meaning, if she wants that is logically possible, works. Meaning, if she wants to, let's say, what I would argue for her win column being, she would be able to causally manipulate the effect of you to her winning. This would work because we see that she has knowledge of beating characters up using causality. It's kind of implied given the scan, or it would just be arbitrary for her to speak of her manipulating causality. We also see in the scan that it says, "Now finally, I'm going to give that Smarty Gilgamesh and that obnoxious kid and can do beatings they so richly deserve." Meaning she used this specific, or she modified causality for her to beat someone up. So I would just say, yeah, there are obviously, I'm not going to say her will is going to work for things that are illogical or she doesn't have knowledge upon, but I could say, well, as long as she has knowledge upon what I need her to manipulate, then it's perfectly fine. And then I've already addressed the fact that the will, or this ability would follow her will, is because it's indexed. The ability is indexical to her will, meaning it would be contradictory if it doesn't follow her will, because the description of the ability requires her will to act in such a way in which she wants it to be. So, and then after this response, I think we can conclude on this point because it's kind of boring and it's kind of just holding the debate back because it's really only gone down similar roads. It hasn't gone down like anything significant. It's always been on, okay, well, how can she do this?
Well, initially it was in reference to if she can, if time itself operates on a different level dependent on dimensional planes, but now it's in reference to whether her statements itself hold any significant value, which I think are different points. I
Yeah,
understand. I can concede on the time point. I don't care for that. Right now, I'm in reference to the way that
yeah,
her powers
fundamentally, it's
operate,
still in reference
or
to
and
the
the
extent.
value of the statement.
Fundamentally, it's still only in reference to the extent of the ability. Henceforth, why we're not really moving on. I think we should conclude after your response. If your response
Yeah,
attacks
sure.
him. Go on.
Yeah, sure. I just want to clarify, right, that I'm not claiming anything in reference to it. I'm not claiming that she can't do this or she can do something. I'm just suggesting that these things are very possible, right? When you talk about these, the way that they highlight her statement and so on, and how she uses the word causality, if there was to be such things as she just only uses a smaller degree, and so on and so forth, that would be something that would be clarified, right? But if they use the word causality, it leads us to be inclined to believe that she'll be using to such a higher degree. My problem is that that would make sense, right? But if I was to grant that, what if, how do we know, or she could possibly be just over exaggerating using a term like that would make sense. I can say, what should we call it? For example, let's say I can control heat to a certain degree, right? I can control heat or temperature to like 100 degrees, and I say I can control heat. I don't necessarily clarify that or the degree that I can control heat, or that maybe I can control it to a degree far higher than this, right? But if I just say I can control heat and I'm over exaggerating it, it may seem as if I can control heat to any extent that I want. But if I can only control heat to just 100 degrees, I can still just say the statement while being over exaggerated. So if I apply the variable, or say that it's possible that this variable could exist, that she's just over exaggerating a statement, it would be in it would make sense logically that if she's over exaggerating, that she would still use the term that you are saying. So I'm just granting like a possibility that's, or interpretations that's equal to yours, that these things could both be true or both be possible. And when it comes to the thing about her will, that you're saying that you agree that there's some level of limit towards her will, that her will can apply to, doesn't apply to logical things, but can apply to anything that's logically possible. What should we call it? I understand that to a degree. I agree, but if what should we call it, her will, like I'm saying, if something's like far more complex, I don't see what necessarily motivates me to think that just because according to her will, that her power is based on her will, that she can somehow be able to control said thing. Because some powers have limits, right? So even if it's like, oh yeah, it's according to my will, I want to think this and this happens. And, some things may not be able to be happen, or some things maybe have certain limits to. Maybe their mind may be able to comprehend certain things, or maybe they might be able to output it to a certain degree according to their will, or maybe, or so on, right? It doesn't really make that much sense. And even then, when you brought up the whole thing in reference to, oh yeah, she has fate manipulation, victory manipulation, none of these things were never brought up according to like what you told me. I don't think those are just panels that you have, but it was never brought up. So I'm not really inclined to use that as a way of like inductive argument on your part, or something that supports your argument. I'm not really going to use that. But when it comes to just the same way being according to will, I think that if I was to say that or apply a variable that's just exaggerative, or that there may be a limit to it, that maybe her willpower has certain limits, right? Because some people's will can only go so far. Not everybody can, like, according to your will or what you have motive for, can only go so far. So I apply that it's possible that she could have some type of limit, or she won't be able to use her powers to maybe like a certain extent, and it wouldn't make sense. When I say a certain extent, I'm not necessarily talking about just dimensionality, but like if somebody's stronger, some people's powers just don't work. Somebody can control all minds, can control any mind they come in contact with, but somebody can just be so much stronger to where they just can't use it, or their willpower just doesn't work, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's essentially my point. And if you want to go to conclusions, we can.
I mean, I'm not gonna address your points directly. I'm just gonna say that nothing you really said attacked anything. The equal interpretation part, it wasn't even an equal interpretation. You didn't give any motivation towards your position. Well, I did. And then for the other parts, it just seems like you're responding to some things I've already responded to, or don't actually address anything. Yeah, we can conclude on the point, and we can give what's called we can get consensus on VC. Hello, VC. What do you guys think? Type in chat here. I'll make a.
But I want to clarify something, that when you brought up the whole thing about me not giving motivation, the same arguments or same things that you use to motivate yours can fall under the same interpretation that I hold. A lot of stuff that you said can still be applied or still can be true, even under my interpretation, which is why I didn't really give a reason. I'm not saying my interpretation is more likely. I'm saying that it's just as likely just based off the evidence that you've already provided.
It can't work under your interpretation. Oh wait, let me put the numbers. I forgot the numbers.
June, why did you vote for yourself?
I said let me put the
Putting
numbers.
the numbers there for us to vote.
My vote doesn't count. So
Yeah.
it's currently 0-0.
Ha of collapse. Why did you vote for yourself?
I haven't clicked shit.
Uh-oh. One
We want
vote for Ha June, 3 votes for Claps.
Where's the polls at?
Yeah, what are you reading? 3 votes. It's 2-1.
Dude, where are the polls at?
It's in general, dickhead. One
Yeah,
to
Oh,
two.
you want me to redo
No,
it? Here, let me redo it. Apparently, it's bugging for elimination. It's bugging for me too. It's showing like 5 people when there's only 1.
Yeah, so the symmetry breaker is just gonna be my bad.
1. Wait, does anyone have perms to make polls? Is there a poll I can make that's proper? Oh, here we go. Here, I'll do this.
You don't even need terms to do it,
No,
dude.
there's a bot that allows me to make polls. This would be easier.
We can probably just say that I won.
Anyways,
Given it's 2-2.
even verdict. All right, we could just have a. Do you want to just like leave to someone? Like we can just give conclusions to one other person in VC and they can give their opinion.
Nah. I mean, we can just leave it on Incon if you want. I don't want to leave it to just one person on verdict.
Or we can leave it to Incon.
All right, but nice to meet you.
You guys can just leave it to me. I'll probably just say that